Hi, my name is Anne Aversa, and I'm the current past president of the Outdoor Art Club.
Current past.
Exactly. Well, it's a whole night about past presidents. Anyway, on behalf of my co-chair, Stephanie Dorfman, future president, and our current president, Michelle Slatala, and our board of directors, I'd like to welcome you to our first public speakers program of the year, Substance and Scandal, the Complex Reality of Women's Lives Then and Now. This event is sponsored by the Outdoor Art Club Legacy Fund Committee. And I know you're saying, what is that? Well, the Legacy Fund was created in 2019 to secure the financial resources needed to preserve, protect, and ensure the long-term viability of this 1904 Bernard Maybeck designed historical landmark building and surrounding grounds. The Legacy Fund accepts memorial gifts and gifts included in estate plans. And a legacy gift is a gift that costs nothing to make now and is easy to arrange and remains under your control. Our committee includes many longtime members, myself, Stephanie Dorfman, Leslie Wachtel, Cindy McCauley, and Catherine Olson. And we're excited that we have two new club members who've joined our committee this year, Larissa Roche, who has extensive experience working with San Francisco Ballet, and Laura Gibble-Fisco, who also happens to be an estate planner. And I asked Laura for a few sage words regarding why people should consider creating a legacy plan. And here's what she said. Creating a legacy plan is a powerful way for individuals to ensure that their values and passions live on while making a lasting impact on the causes they care most about. By including the Outdoor Art Club in such a plan, you can help preserve this historic clubhouse, an irreplaceable community treasure that embodies history, culture, and connection for generations to come. A legacy gift not only safeguards this landmark, but also affirms commitment to protecting shared spaces that inspire creativity, foster fellowship, and honor the past while enriching the future. So I think she captured our thoughts perfectly. Tonight, for those individuals who have included the Outdoor Art Club in their estate plans, I have a little legacy circle pin for them. It is an image of the front gate of the clubhouse created by club member and artist Lynn Klein. And Lynn, would you mind standing and being recognized? Thank you so much for your artistry. The image is also on the bookmarks from tonight's event. If you have included the club in your legacy plan or are planning to do so, please see Stephanie and me in the library afterwards so you can receive your pin. And if anyone has any questions regarding the Legacy Fund, of course, we'll be there to answer any questions you might have. Okay, on to the show. Exactly 2 years ago, I was chatting with longtime club members Melissa Kurtz and Linda Chittenden about how I wanted them to speak at the club regarding the book that they had published during the pandemic called Ladies to the Rescue, which was about Mill Valley women who founded the Outdoor Art Club in 1902. They confided in me that they were actually in the midst of writing a second book called Ladies of Substance, The Lives of Early Outdoor Art Club Presidents. So last September, Linda and Melissa presented their research to the club, and their talk was wildly successful. And if you'd like to see that presentation, it's available on the Outdoor Art Club YouTube channel, and I highly recommend it. And tonight's presentation will also be on the YouTube channel for those who were unable to come tonight. This year, they finished their second book, and the board of directors of our club published it. So tonight, after the presentation, Linda and Melissa will be in the library where you got your drinks and where they'll be signing books. When I think about the future of our club, I think 50 years from now, the only two members that will be remembered from our generation will be Melissa Kurtz and Linda Chittenden. And that's going to be because of their historical research and discoveries about the foundings of the women of Mill Valley. Melissa joined the club 18 years ago and has been our archives chair for many years. She served on our board and is currently our webmaster, as well as a multitude of other positions. Her career was in airlines and commercial real estate database development. Linda has been a member even longer, since 2001. She joined the club after 35 years of teaching in the Mill Valley School District. And in the club, she has also served on the board and has been our newsletter editor for many years. Linda does not consider herself a writer, but a teacher, eager to teach us about the history of Mill Valley and the founding women who helped shape our town and club. Please give a warm welcome to Melissa Kurtz and Linda Chittenden.
Okay. As Ann said, tonight's program is a follow-up to the one we did in September. Now, that program emphasized an abundance of substance in the lives of 3 early OAC presidents. Little scandal was discovered about these women, beyond a few divorces and a premature baby born 3 months after her parents' wedding. Nothing scandalous. However, in tonight's stories, you will learn about 2 other early OAC presidents whose lives were more complicated. Admirable accomplishments are included, but their lives also contained events that even today would raise eyebrows. But before getting into specifics, you probably want to know, where did we find all this information that's going to be included in tonight's program? First, Melissa is an expert at retrieving all that can be found on Ancestry.com. But you gotta know that the local newspapers of the early 20th century were the social media of that day. Plus, journalistic ethics then were such that often news articles included salacious details. The publishers seemed to see their purpose as not only to inform readers, but to also entertain them, maybe even titillate them. Think William Randolph Hearst. And a century later, an interested reader need not wade through scrapbooks of yellowed newspaper clippings or squint attempting to decipher microfiche prints. It's all online. There will be 2 voices in tonight's program. Mine is the writer's voice, contributing context and commentary. Melissa will be reading exact quotations from primary sources. Your heart will ache with empathy for one of these women, because what is scandalous in her story is not questionable behavior, but more about the unfortunate results of what happened to her. The other woman you might feel somewhat judgy when you learn of her deeds. Nonetheless, ready yourself for compelling stories of 2 women who, under the benevolent gaze of these dragons where you are now, they did community work and rejoiced in the sisterhood of Mill Valley's Outdoor Art Club.
Catherine Wilson Ruddock, born 1864, died 1943. She was the Outdoor Art Club's 7th president in the year 1912 to 1913.
Now, we do not have a photograph of Catherine Wilson Ruddock. This image was created to illustrate the enigma present in the life of a woman who left no personal writing. Yet much about her life was learned through census, funeral records, legal findings regarding a contested will, plus some very revelatory newspaper clippings. Together, they suggest a life replete with tragedy, as well as many unanswered questions. The empty place where a face should be is a visual metaphor for this woman. The element of scandal is suggested not by her, but by her husband and the society in which they lived. A few facts of Catherine Wilson Ruddock's early life were easily discovered. She was born in 1864 in San Francisco. Her parents had arrived as immigrants around 1858. Soon a daughter was born and named Maria after her mother. In 1864, Catherine was born. Unfortunately, when Catherine was only an infant, her father died. Was his death caused by disease, or while working as a laborer, did he have a fatal accident? The funeral home record was not specific, stating only that James Wilson, age 45, died February 4th, 1865. It is not unreasonable to conclude that his family was left in a desperate situation. Maria was now alone, responsible for young children. What could she do? The 1870 federal census revealed her solution. Maria Wilson was recorded as a 42-year-old widow, head of a household in a San Francisco rented home. Her
Keeping house,
occupation, plus the listing of 7 male additional adults in the home, suggests she was running a boarding home. In the late 19th century, these were usually family homes which offered lodging, meals, and housekeeping for single working people accustomed to living in extended families and for whom the whole idea of living alone would have been unthinkable. In addition to 2 domestic servants whose birthplace was China, 5 males, all immigrants aged 20 to 40, also lived in the home. 10 years later, Maria and her children appear to be somewhat better off. While Catherine was still attending school, her sister was employed, presumably bringing home some money. Records from the 1890 census burned in a warehouse fire. But in this 1900 census, Maria was still head of a household, living in a rented home with 2 adult daughters. She was then 72 years old, and Catherine was listed as a teacher. From later census data, I learned that Catherine was a college graduate, a singular accomplishment then for a young woman not born of privilege. But not surprisingly, most surprisingly actually, from a brief newspaper mention of a 40th alumni gathering in Yosemite, I learned that Catherine Wilson graduated from the University of California in 1887. Additionally, from a surprising item in a Grass Valley newspaper, we discovered that she had taught at a high school there.
she was adored by her pupils and held in the highest esteem by parents and trustees.
Catherine later returned to San Francisco as
An instructor of Greek in the Girls' High School of San Francisco.
Think about that. She taught Greek to adolescents. This girl, whose mother, in order to feed her children, had once run a boarding house, had not only gone to college, but had studied the classics at California's premier university. That knocked me out when I found it. Then, in 1903, a terse listing of recently issued marriage licenses in the San Francisco Call indicated that Catherine's life appeared to be on an upward trajectory. For the time, it was a late first marriage, as she was 37, he 41. But her future looked promising. Her new husband, Patrick Henry Ruddick, was an accountant in
The fire insurance industry.
and later accounts suggest he was a man with significant property in San Francisco. Then, on April 19th, 1906, at 5 in the morning, only 3 years after her marriage, a devastating earthquake and subsequent fire changed Catherine's world. Additionally, one can imagine that for someone in
The fire insurance industry.
Patrick Henry Ruddick's world was probably also altered. But in what way? Soon after the San Francisco earthquake, Catherine and husband relocated to Marin. They built a house on Sunnyside Avenue in Mill Valley and seemingly settled happily into the community, at least for a while.
That's a recent photo, by the way.
Catherine joined the Outdoor Art Club in 1907. In the spring of 1912, she was elected the club's 7th president. At her installation, Catherine Ruddick was probably looking forward to the upcoming year as one of continued involvement in the California Federation of Women's Club, working on strategies to educate women on the responsibilities of voting, as California had recently passed an initiative granting female suffrage. With the club, she was no doubt looking ahead to how the OAC could help the upcoming Panama Pacific Exposition succeed. She was also probably thinking about ways in which she could facilitate more communication between the club and the town trustees. Now, why might this woman have been in the perfect position to do that? Well, her husband appears to have made himself even more known in the community than his wife. We have no photographs of the man, but it is logical to assume he was gregarious and, when in the company of others, quite congenial. In the spring of 1912, at the time of Catherine's election, this man put himself successfully forward and was
Elected a town trustee by the largest vote ever polled in Mill Valley for any candidate.
Now, was this a time of personal triumph for both of them? It's complicated. Local newspaper articles at the time definitely suggest that Catherine may well have married a man of means, but she also married a man that today would probably be diagnosed as bipolar. When married, her husband was no doubt charming, even seductive, popular with one and all. But as will be revealed, it is obvious that he was also increasingly prone to debilitating depressions. In April 1912, the town learned
Ruddick to resign from Board of Trustees. Poor health forces him to stop and will leave Valley for time. Town trustee P.H. Ruddick has fully determined to resign from the board. He so announced to the record Thursday morning. In explaining his action, Mr. Ruddick stated that his health was such that he could see no other solution of the problem. Much as he wishes to serve the town, he finds that his health is so greatly impaired that he must seek other scenes. The Ruddick family will, therefore, soon leave Mill Valley for an indefinite period, and for that reason, it is likely that at the next meeting of the board, Mr. Ruddick will tender his resignation as trustee.
That spring, the Ruddock family did not leave Mill Valley, nor did Ruddock resign. It appears that in the summer of 1912, weeks of public dithering took place. One can imagine the issue of whether or not the man would resign being the talk of the whole town. Finally, in July,
Ruddock will insist upon retiring as trustee. Poor health will not permit him to again take up the duties of that office. Town trustee P.H. Ruddock has resigned his office as trustee of Mill Valley. This is official, and an answer to the persistent inquiries as to whether trustee Ruddock would again resume the duties of that office. He insists that he will retire from the board.
and how did this article conclude?
Mr. Ruddock is in Livermore, in the sanitarium there. He is improving slowly, and at latest reports was getting along nicely. Mrs. Ruddock visits him each week. He will not return to Mill Valley until his medical advisors pronounce him fit to do so.
This town drama centered on Patrick Henry Ruddock. It all took place 1912, 1913. But wait, we need to remember that Catherine Wilson Ruddock's term of office as the 7th president of the club was 1912 to 1913. In her 1940 club history, dear Carrie Kleiss included at least a paragraph about each of the early presidents. However, about our 7th, she wrote but one sentence, possibly unwilling to say more about what must have been a difficult and troubling time.
Mrs. P.H. Ruddock, 1912 to 1913, was our 7th president. During her year, the club sent a box of clothing to the flood sufferers of Dayton, Ohio.
Catherine's fragile world collapsed in the middle of her presidential year. This January 14th, 1913 San Francisco Call lengthy obituary surely revealed more about Catherine's husband than she probably wanted the world to know.
P.H. Ruddock is suicide in woods. Insurance man, worried by loss of fortune in 1906 fire, hangs himself. With a double cord of clothesline knotted about the neck, the body of Patrick Henry Ruddock, insurance man of San Francisco, whose residence was in Mill Valley, was found this afternoon hanging from the branches of a tree in Muir Woods. Morbid and depressed through 5 years of worry over the loss, during the 1906 catastrophe of a fortune built by years of toil, Ruddock ended his life by suicide. For more than 5 months, Ruddock had been suffering from an acute mental affliction. For a month, he was under treatment at the Ukiah Hospital. When released last Sunday, he returned home as cured, but yesterday afternoon, he left home for a walk in the hills and was not seen until the discovery of his body. His wife, a popular matron of the Marin Set and president of the Outdoor Art Club of Mill Valley, is suffering from nervous prostration due to his disappearance, and the county officials and her friends have refrained from breaking the news to her. The discovery of the body was made by a hiker who was hiking from Muir Woods to Tamalpais with a friend. Ruddock had amassed a comfortable fortune, but lost all his property in the fire. He fell into fits of morbidity over his adversities. With his wife, he came to Mill Valley, and his fortune mended to the extent of his establishing a comfortable home here, but his health gradually failed. Last spring, in the county elections, Ruddock was elected a town trustee by the largest vote ever polled in Mill Valley for any candidate. But owing to poor health, he resigned the office a few weeks later. Until yesterday, he was confined to his bed. That morning, Mrs. Ruddock went to San Francisco, leaving her husband under the care of her sister, Maria Wilson. After luncheon, Ruddock donned his coat and hat and told his sister-in-law that he needed a little recreation and was going to take a walk in the hills. He appeared in good spirits, and on departing said he would return soon. Darkness fell, and when Mrs. Ruddock returned, he had not come home. Searching parties were sent out, but no trace was found. Ruddick was 48 years old.
Now, what was the scandal here? A mentally ill man's suicide, or the intrusive, insensitive way it was reported? And the Mill Valley Record the day before scooped the San Francisco paper with even more lurid details.
Body of P.H. Ruddick found hanging to tree in Muir Woods. Just as we go to press, word is received that the lifeless body of P.H. Ruddick of Sunnyside Avenue, Mill Valley, had been found hanging to a limb of a tree by a rope, presumably taken from a hammock, as there was a ring attached to one end of it. He had evidently climbed out on a limb, which overhung a bank, tied one end of the rope to the limb, the other around his neck, and rolled or jumped from the tree. $10 in gold and a cheap watch were found upon the body.
Now, what did Patrick Henry Ruddick's death mean for his wife? Of course it was traumatic. Just a month later, in February of 1913, Catherine resigned as OAC president. But was Kath Ruddick so financially destitute that it led to his suicide, or was the act, sadly, more the result of mental illness? Did his death leave Catherine penniless? A collection of legal papers hint at answers to these questions. P.H. Ruddick left a will, handwritten on June 8, 1912, 7 months before his suicide. In it, he
gives and bequeaths to my wife, Catherine W. Ruddick, all my estate, whether real, personal, or mixed.
But arguing its authenticity, his brother James contested the will, which launched a lengthy legal process. And after years of appraisals and judgments, it was finally determined in 1916 that Ruddick left
no personal property.
That the only real property he owned was a single
Unimproved
lot valued at $800. That was it?
Where?
If Ruddick was made so destitute by the fire that all he had 6 years later was an unimproved lot in Mill Valley, why did one brother contest the will when he had made his other brother, George, the executor of his estate? Perhaps James had reasons for suspecting the value of Patrick's estate was greater than $800. Persistent Melissa kept digging and discovered records showing that soon after the 1906 earthquake, Ruddick had sold several San Francisco properties to Catherine for $10 each, thus hiding his estate, the extent of his individual estate. Brotherly love among the Ruddick boys was probably complicated, but we will never know what possible scandal might be the reason. Census records from 1920 to 1930 show the widow Catherine Ruddick's primary residence continued to be this Sunnyside Avenue home, a house she owned. She worked at the public library as an assistant librarian and held Shakespeare classes in her home. This intelligent, well-educated woman continued to be active in her local community and beyond. In the spring of 1914, with rousing rhetoric, the San Francisco Call initiated a campaign for
the rebel opponents of rubbish, litter, and trash to act like the combined and strategic attack of a mighty army upon a band of vandal invaders. From sunrise on April 13, when the bugle sounds for the attack, until sunset on April 18, when cleanup week comes to a close,
a battle against
demon dirt,
took place. It appears that Catherine was living in the city then, and prominent enough that her own words were quoted as part of the newspaper's appeal for participation.
I believe Cleanup Week to be most excellent and think that it should be the forerunner of a still greater movement. With the opening of the fair so near at hand, I think that everyone should strive to make the city as attractive as possible. We should clean up not only the week opening April 13, but continue cleaning up, planting, and beautifying, so that when the thousands of visitors arrive, they will be at once impressed by the splendid appearance of our city.
In April of 1918, when American doughboy soldiers were fighting in Europe's Great War, a brief article in the Mill Valley Record evidenced Catherine's continued activism.
War Work for Women. A meeting of exceptional interest was held at the home of Mrs. P.H. Ruddick yesterday afternoon, when Mrs. F.C. Turner of Oakland, chairman of the Women's Committee Council of Defense for Alameda County, addressed about 20 women on war work for women. A full report will be given next week of this address, which was very favorably commented upon by all present.
Catherine's life during these years was comfortable. She owned property, earned her own money as an employee of the public library, was known and respected in her community. So much so that in 1919, she was one of 9 women selected to be on a 25-member Marin County grand jury. Brief bits in the local paper attested to her many activities throughout the 1920s. Catherine Wilson Ruddick's life was busy and rewarding. She probably expected that she would continue to be active and age comfortably in her own home. But unfortunately, sometime before 1930, it appears that Catherine Ruddick fell and broke her hip. Then a seriously debilitating injury with little possibility of a successful surgical repair. Her mobility was no doubt severely impaired, leading to a number of poor health consequences. With a broken hip, could she return to her Mill Valley home? No. Where did she go? A 1932 San Francisco City Directory listed her, now age 68, living in a
Protestant Episcopal Old Ladies Home.
She would be confined in an
Old Ladies Home.
until her death 11 years later. Let's pause and reflect on why we no longer refer to senior care facilities as
Old Ladies Homes.
the term's patronizing condescension makes us quite uncomfortable. Begun in 1864, accounts of this church-connected charity placement for needy females reflected a genuine Christian impulse to provide care. But like most safety net charities, it struggled. The board's auxiliary focused on fundraising,
the proceeds of which will be devoted to making more attractive and comfortable the rooms occupied by the old ladies who are charges of the home.
benefits and entertainment did not provide enough funds to meet all needs.
Like most of San Francisco's charitable institutions, the home is sadly in need of funds, and the receipts of yesterday's entertainment will find a ready use at the hands of the treasurer.
In 1926, the original home on Golden Gate Avenue, which could house 30 to 40 patients, moved to Lombard Avenue, where the patient load increased to between 60 and 70. And it's unknown whether or not the quality of care improved over those years. Since the 1940 federal census named 64 other female
Inmates,
most in their 70s and 80s, living all together in this.
Old ladies' home.
What can we imagine about Catherine's life during these years? Most,
Inmates,
probably all, were there because they were not able to live independently. They needed care. But what was the quality of the care they received? Poignantly, also listed among those 64 other
inmates,
was Maria, Catherine's unmarried older sister, who had been living with her before she broke her hip. But why had Maria gone to live there? When there, were the two sisters able to be together? What were their living quarters like? At least 11 years of what must have been a deeply felt, humiliating contrast to her independent and prominent life in Mill Valley. On April 29th, 1943, 79-year-old Catherine died. The funeral record said the cause of death was
hippostatic pneumonia,
defined as
a slow-developing chronic pulmonary disorder. It is primarily inflamed by chronic congestion, blood stasis, and edema at the bottom of the lungs of long-term bedridden patients.
This strongly suggests what her final years were like. Also listed as a more immediate cause of death was
cerebral hemorrhage.
6 months later, Catherine's older sister, Maria, also died. Two sisters who since birth had spent most of their life living near one another should have been near one another after death. This cypress lawn gravestone's name and dates accurately indicates this is where Maria E. Wilson is buried. But who was Catherine E. Reynolds? Melissa did some further digging and discovered she was an aunt, the sister of Catherine's mother. Decades separated their deaths, yet cemetery records were complete enough to result in these two family members being together for eternity. But what about Catherine? Where do her remains lie? Funeral records indicate she was cremated, but I could find not at all an image of a gravestone for her. However, it is comforting to finally discover that she is not alone. Cypress Lawn website records reveal her companion. Now together for eternity, our Catherine's ashes rest with the remains of her husband, dead 30 years before herself. It is clear Catherine Wilson Ruddick was an intelligent, well-educated woman imbued with strong, not soft, community spirit. Yet so much about her remains unknown. Perhaps this is best exemplified by the words she chose to represent herself, a short phrase found by Melissa in a yellowed 1887 yearbook published by that year's UC Berkeley graduating class.
Soft as an unfledged bird when at rest.
Whatever did she mean by that? 22 years old when she chose those words. What had she been imagining about her future life? Another unanswered, poignant question to ponder about our seventh president. In writing the book, Ladies of Substance, the challenge of the project was always how best to do it. For me, writing coherent, factual, honest stories of these women's lives has been a delightful task of historical archaeology. These early presidents of the OAC were vigorous, ambitious, idealistic women who were determined to influence their world, yet they possessed little power. Plus, whatever writings they left behind were focused on goals and accomplishments, not their personal lives. A century plus later, could our research find enough information to enable me to reconstruct and imagine a full life for each one? Fortunately, archivists have preserved decades-old newspapers, now easily found on the internet. Unfortunately, newspapers then and now spent little ink on examples of character strengths or personality traits. However, they found heartache and scandal quite newsworthy. Thus, if the woman involved was prominent, if the scandal was particularly salacious, if the news writer had access to lurid details, well, those stories tended to dominate when considering a woman's life.
Ethelwyn de Winton Morris, born 1880, died 1956. She was the 14th president of the Outdoor Art Club in the year 1921 to 1922.
Rest assured, in addition to facts provided by the institutional data found on Ancestry, our next story will include a titillating scandal. Now, photographs of Ethelwyn are absent, so I am using this drawing to represent her. Notice, though, how her eyes are open to opportunity. Now, little is known about Ethelwyn de Winton's early life, other than she was the eldest daughter of a couple who in the late 19th century immigrated to California from England. Her father first worked in San Francisco as a shipwright, one who builds ships. And he later became a naval architect, one who designs ships. I assume financial success because her parents owned a home in the city, and also at the turn of the 20th century, they built a home in Mill Valley. In 1916, when she was 26 years old,
06.
06, thank you.
No problem.
Ethelwyn married a younger man, 20-year-old Harry Chester Morris. No published announcement of the marriage has been found. Each year was only inferred from a later census record. Since little can be inferred about them from this factual crumb, one wonders, who was this man that Ethelwyn married? From census records, we know that Harry Morris was born in Santa Clara, and then detail about him was found in an 1885 San Jose Herald article. Headline,
Flattering reports from the public schools.
because it seems Harry Morris, a sixth grader at the Empire Gardens Elementary School, had made the honor roll. Nonetheless, after marriage, records suggest that for the rest of their married life, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Morris lived in residences owned by her parents, sometimes living with Ethelwyn's parents in San Francisco or in their summer home in Mill Valley. From this information, it's reasonable to think that a somewhat skewed power dynamic perhaps existed in this childless marriage. When the couple sometimes resided in San Francisco, where Harry co-owned a printing company, it was Mill Valley which seemed to be their primary residence.
Mr. and Mrs. Harry C. Morris have returned to their home on Eugene Avenue after spending the winter in the city.
However, she definitely had established her own presence in town. as early as 1912 in a notice about the book club, and all the married attendees, they all, except Ethelwyn, were listed by their president, their husband's name, but not Ethelwyn. Ethelwyn Morris was elected president of the Outdoor Art Club in the spring of 1921. In her lengthy president's report, she gave credit to others for the accomplishments of the club during her leadership year.
The philanthropic work under the very willing chairman, Mrs. Catherine Ruddick, has investigated calls for assistance and responded with provisions at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and other times when needed. Other sections gave considerable opportunity for expression of individual taste and for such diversified study and work that I feel they form a large part of the life and strength of the club.
She also expressed her opinion on an ever-present difficult issue.
After investigating what other clubs are accomplishing, I also recommend for your serious consideration materially raising our initiation fee and dues. If we are to do bigger things, we must have the wherewithal and the facilities with which to work.
Her report even included an oft-repeated chore over the years.
The first notable event of the year's work was the revision of our Constitution and bylaws by a committee headed by our faithful Mrs. Mamie Jacobs and the printing of same.
It was during Ethelwyn's presidential year that,
after 6 months, careful deliberation, a committee arranged for the purchase of a new Steinway piano on which first payments have been made. We still have the piano, it's sitting behind me.
Hear, hear.
she concluded her president's report with a heartfelt expression of gratitude.
In serving you, my dear fellow members, I have given you the best I have in time, in thought, and energy, and in so doing, the best has come back to me, in richness 100. I thank you for the honor of acting as your president and for the joy and privilege of serving you. Mere words can never express my appreciation for the kindness and courtesies extended to me throughout the year.
After her term as OAC president, Ethelwyn continued community involvement. She served on the local board of health, who
Went to Palo Alto to inspect the incinerator reduction plant for garbage and sewage.
But in May of 1927, Ethelwyn's life and marriage became the subject of sensational headlines on both sides of the bay.
Nurse named in wife's suit. A story of a husband's alleged fondness for another woman, repeatedly denied, but finally encompassing his whole life, is told by Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris of Mill Valley in a suit for divorce against the printing firm of Morris and Sheridan, filed in the San Francisco County Clerk's office today. The case was transferred from Marin County, where Mrs. Morris originally brought suit, because of the fact that Morris is said to have taken up residence in the city. The complaint goes into vivid detail regarding Morris's alleged cruelty and friendliness for Miss Dorothy Folker, a nurse. Mrs. Morris says it began in 1922. Morris, she sets forth, would take Miss Folker in his car to the ferry from Mill Valley, and they would cross the bay together. He told his wife, she says, that he was only being neighborly. She discovered, however, that he was seeing the young woman secretly, and later the meetings became more frequent after Miss Folker left Mill Valley. Lately, the couple had been much together at Morris's apartment on California Street. The wife charges. The separation of the couple occurred on February 4. They had been married for 21 years.
Now, in the midst of this lurid journalistic focus on scandal, we must pause for context. In 1922, Nurse Dorothy Folker was the 33-year-old daughter of an OAC founder, Alice Folker, and was at the time living with her mother and brother on Elma Street in Mill Valley, a short distance from the Eugene Avenue home of Mr. and Mrs. Morris. Beginning in 1922, Dorothy Folker and Harry Morris commuted together to and from the city, giving them plenty of time to become well acquainted. Harry was 46 years old, married decades to a wife who did not seem to have much need for him. Dorothy was unmarried, the fifth child of a single mother who had long struggled to provide for her children. Census records show that Dorothy's father had not often been present when she was a child, so perhaps she was easily drawn to a kind, older man. The two began a relationship, and by March of 1927, they were what today would be called a couple, meaning they were lovers. Dorothy had moved from Mill Valley and was living in an apartment in San Francisco. Plus, Harry also appears to no longer be living in Mill Valley with his wife of 21 years, but was living in his own apartment in the city. Unable to step away from reporting a juicy scandal, the Oakland Tribune published more salacious details about what had been revealed. The article began with a sentence that is guaranteed to grab a reader.
For sheer fervency of feeling, the Songs of Solomon are frozen puddings compared with the love letters said to have been received by Harry C. Morris, San Francisco businessman. At least such is the allegation of Mrs. E. Morris, whose separate maintenance suit was transferred to the San Francisco courts yesterday from San Rafael. Morris's Bible, according to his mate of 21 years, was a notebook of ardent love letters from one Dorothy Folker, a trained nurse. They were found by Mrs. Morris sometime prior to her separation from Morris on February 4 last, according to the action. That notebook is my Bible, and you might as well make up your mind that I'm going to continue my adherence to it. Later, according to Mrs. Morris, her husband climaxed a 5-year intimacy with Miss Folker by taking up his residence with her at 1966 California Street.
Clearly, the attachment formed by Dorothy and Harry was intense. Details of what happened after that May date in court are sketchy. The next relevant news clippings to be found are dated nearly 4 months later, but the articles imply there had been previous courtroom testimony.
Wife bears vigil at Love Nest dinner. Window shades and shadowy silhouettes vied with more darling daddy letters in yesterday's hearing of the suit for separate maintenance brought by Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris, a prominent clubwoman, against her husband, owner of a large printing plant. I stood across the street, the wife testified, and saw my husband enter an apartment with this nurse, Dorothy Folker. The shades were 2/3 up in the kitchen, and I could see her moving around getting dinner for him. That was about 7 o'clock. The lights went out a little later, and I could see nothing more until about 10 o'clock, when they went on again. The shades were down in the other rooms, but they went up at 10, and I saw my husband and Dorothy preparing to go out. I even saw them put on their hats. Mrs. Effie Keystone, sister of Mrs. Morris, told the court how on the night of September 13 last, Mrs. Morris took to her watch outside the apartment, and that she also saw the shades rise and fall, and the lights go off and on. That later, the husband emerged with the attractive nurse on his arm and escorted her to his auto parked nearby. The alleged love rendezvous was in Miss Folker's abode. The wife's attorney then read this letter into the record and addressed from Morris to his wife at the time they separated in February. Dear Ethelwyn, loving my Dorothy as I do, for having fed my heart when it was starving, I can never again make you happy, nor can I be happy with you or without full possession of her. I am going now to her waiting arms. I am burning all bridges behind me and ask you to kindly release me from the legal tie that lovelessly binds you and me, so that Dorothy and I may have each other lawfully. I know you will forgive me for seeking elsewhere the heart balm I could not find in you. Signed, Eric. Morris sat calmly in the courtroom, which was well sprinkled with club women, friends of his wife, during the reading of his ardent epistle, and in fact, throughout the day. Miss Folker was not present.
Now, the Darling Daddy letters, so called by the press, were Harry's collection of letters from Dorothy,
His Bible.
This resulted in the papers labeling the court case
The Daddy Suit. Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris's story of having witnessed alleged misconduct of her husband through the windows of his apartment was denounced by several defense witnesses in a continuation of the hearing in her suit for separate maintenance yesterday. The owner of the apartment house was among those who testified yesterday that it is impossible to see from the street what is occurring in the apartment. She had made a special test, she said. Her testimony was corroborated by the former manager of the apartment house and also by Herbert Folker, brother of the girl named as Morris's companion. There was such conflicted testimony over the alleged eavesdropping that the judge took under consideration the proposal that he visit the apartment house today to see if it is possible to stand in the street and see through the windows what is going on inside the apartment. During yesterday's session, the judge expressed a mild rebuke on the nature of Mrs. Morris's evidence. I thought it was only in New York, he said, that people have to resort to spying, detective work, and stealing letters to get evidence for a case of this kind.
The judge in this case did not go stand in this street to discover if it was possible to actually see what was going on in that apartment. Instead, he continued the case, got the attorneys together, and suggested a compromise.
Whereby Mrs. Morris will grant Morris a complete divorce and accepts a generous settlement.
A few days later, the results of the case was reported.
Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris, prominent Mill Valley clubwoman, availed herself of the well-known woman's prerogative yesterday and changed her mind. As a result, instead of vigorously prosecuting the separate maintenance suit she had begun against her husband, she filed an amended complaint for divorce at the last moment, and she accepted a decree of divorce from Morris on simple charges of cruelty. In taking the divorce, which is regarded as a victory for Morris in his plea for his freedom, Mrs. Morris relinquished all claims on his property, accepting a lump sum settlement amounting to $20,000. This includes the family home in Mill Valley. She will also receive $150 a month alimony from Morris. The agreement to end the legal battle, which had occupied the court all last week, was reached at the suggestion of the judge and arranged out of court by the attorneys for the pair.
Unfortunately, this agreement did not settle the case. 6 weeks later,
Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris again took to her latest domestic troubles to court yesterday. She charges that Morris has not paid her $150 a month alimony as ordered by the court.
no evidence of whether or not Harry ever paid any alimony to his ex-wife has been discovered. Now, how did this divorce change the lives of the individuals involved? Harry Morris and Dorothy Folker married in 1928, bought a house in San Francisco's Sunset District, and lived there with their newborn son, Grover Chester Morris. That April, Harry was 53 years old, Dorothy was 39. Unfortunately, their domestic bliss did not last long. The following year, on July 30th, 1930, Harry Chester Morris died. The funeral record did not list a cause of death, only that he died at home, leaving behind an infant child. Subsequent census data showed that the widow Dorothy no longer worked as a nurse, but she had taken over her husband's printing business. In 1940, she was living in a rented apartment on Masonic Avenue with her son Grover and her mother Alice. Dorothy Vida Folker Morris never married again and died in 65 at age 76. As for the boy Grover, it appears he was raised by his widowed mother and grandmother and did not marry until he was 51 years old. At the time of his death in 1997, he had been
a dedicated employee of the DeSoto Cab Company for many years.
Now, Ethelwyn's life also changed dramatically after her divorce, as best shown by this November 1928 Mill Valley Record headline.
Bon voyage, well-known clubwoman to leave on world trip.
She was
Royally entertained by friends prior to an extended world trip to be taken on the Empress Australia, on which she will sail from New York next week.
Now, Ethelwyn liked to keep the town apprised of her whereabouts, so news of her travels often appeared in the Mill Valley Record's passing throng columns.
Mrs. E.W. Clark has received postcard messages from Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris written at Pompeii and Karnak while on her world trip. Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris has reached Japan on her world tour. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. DeWitten of Throckmorton Avenue, expect that she will arrive home in April.
This world tour seems to have been the last time Ethelwyn traveled alone. For the next 12 years, on numerous trips abroad, her companion on these journeys was a Mrs. A.C. Miller. Now, clearly, the two women's wealth was not diminished at all by the 1929 stock market crash and subsequent depression. When they continued to travel together, they let the town know geographic specifics with multiple postcards. In July 1931,
word comes that Mrs. A.C. Miller, who left San Francisco several weeks ago for travels abroad, has arrived in Italy. She was accompanied as far as New York City by Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris. Together, they visited Colorado Springs, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Niagara Falls before they parted at New York, from whose port Mrs. Miller sailed. On her return trip to San Francisco and Mill Valley, Mrs. Morris visited New Orleans, stopped in Arizona and New Mexico. She visited the Grand Canyon, the famous haunts of the ancient cliff dwellers, and some of the present-day Indian villages, where she found herself hospitably received and entertained.
Given the two women's extensive and indirect itinerary, presumably they journeyed from Marin to the East Coast by car. If so, that means Ethelwyn was the driver and made the return trip alone, which at the time must have been quite an adventure, given the dearth of paved roads in the nation. Then the very next year, the two women went abroad together, but this time they didn't have to sail from New York.
Mrs. A.C. Miller and Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris will sail March 22nd on the Empress of Britain for an extended visit to Europe. Their ship, which will carry them all the way to Cherbourg, is the largest that has ever entered San Francisco Harbor and is also one of the most luxurious. Stops will be made in Havana and New York. The two women will spend the month of May in Paris, and following a tour of the British Isles, will stop for another month in London. They may continue their travels in Europe after that.
4 months later, the local paper again reported on their travels.
Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris, who, with Mrs. A.C. Miller, also of Mill Valley, is making an extended continental tour, writes of their trip from Paris to London by airplane, following a 7-week sojourn in Paris. England is a perfect garden spot for this time of year, her letter reads, and the weather is all that one could wish for. Mrs. Miller and I are having a wonderful time exploring London, as well as the quaint and beautiful town so easily reached by their splendid bus service. We are looking forward to some trips through the Shakespeare, Browning, and Wordsworth country, with a visit to Scotland a little later.
After returning from their second trip abroad, the two women continued to travel together. And now in 1933, and for the next few years, they were able to do so in Ethelwyn's newly acquired acquired automobile, a
Dodge Deluxe sedan. Mrs. A.C. Miller and Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris are sojourning at Lake Tahoe. They motored there in Mrs. Morris's new car. Mrs. A.C. Miller of Coronet Avenue and Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris of Eugene Avenue have been visiting a number of points of interest in Southern California while on a motor trip. Boulder Dam was on their route, and they viewed the great project from above and below. Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris and Mrs. A.C. Miller, both former residents of Mill Valley, are sojourning at Palm Springs and report they are enjoying the desert very much.
Now, this last tidbit suggests the two women no longer lived in Mill Valley. Perhaps they were living together in Berkeley or San Francisco. But whether they lived together or in separate residences, they were still traveling together.
Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris and Mrs. A.C. Miller left Los Angeles Saturday by boat for Acapulco for a tour through Mexico. Mrs. A.C. Miller and Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris are spending the winter in Miami, Florida, having motored across the continent. They will return by boat to Havana and then through the Panama Canal. Mrs. A.C. Miller and Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris sailed from Florida to Havana to take the President Wilson for San Francisco.
The two women arrived back in San Francisco in 1936 aboard the U.S. President Wilson, having experienced the thrill of again sailing through the Panama Canal. They appeared to have been enamored of places with warm sunshine, since 3 years later they embarked
A 2-month Caribbean cruise, which took them as far as the Bermudas.
Another discovered passenger list stated that the SS Washington arrived at the port of Los Angeles from the Panama Canal Zone in February of 1939. It appears that the two women had traveled through the Panama Canal at least 3 times. Now, at my computer, reading through a digital folder full of Mill Valley Record news of residents receiving postcards from Ethelwyn Morris's post-divorce travels, something became obvious. Whether or not Harry Chester Morris ever paid his ex-wife any alimony, Ethelwyn did not need his money. During the 1930s, the nation and the world was in the midst of an economic depression that brought hardship, homelessness, and hunger to millions. However, it's clear the finances of Ethelwyn, as well as her travel companion, Mrs. A.C. Miller, that have not been negatively impacted. Now, when reading of Ethelwyn's travels, an obvious question arises. Just exactly who was this travel companion of hers? Whereas references to Ethelwyn in the paper always included her given name, that was not so for her travel partner. She was always simply listed as Mrs. A.C. Miller. Intrigued, super sleuth Melissa took another dive down Ancestry and found her. Joanna Annie Bosch was born in 1886.
66.
66. 66. I don't read numbers.
Uh,
Making her 14 years older than Ethelwyn. When she was 24, she married Alexander Miller, a
Broker/produce clerk.
who died in 1930. By 1910, the family was living in Mill Valley on Coronet Avenue, which made her Ethelwyn's neighbor. Annie never joined the outdoor art club, so it's assumed that due to the proximity of their homes, the two women's friendship or love affair began in the neighborhood. We know these two middle-aged, affluent women traveled together at least until 1940. After that, Annie Miller disappears from the remaining newspaper clippings about Ethelwyn, who did manage, however, to keep her name in the local paper. Now, I confess that I misled you when I said we had no photographs of Ethelwyn Morris. This drawing was what I had kept in my head when writing about her. But then I discovered a photograph. In 1952, the Mill Valley Record published photos of 8 living past presidents of the Outdoor Art Club. Of these 7, only one caption in the photographs are identified. No, 7 of the captions are identified with a Mrs. and a husband's name. As you can see, though, that was not true for our 14th president. For me, this Ethelwyn does not at all look like I had imagined. I mean, here she looks kind of sweet and harmless, but that final time her name appeared in the newspaper was a brief death notice published in January 31st, 1958.
Ethelwyn Morris dies in hospital. Mrs. Ethelwyn Morris, a Mill Valley resident for the past 48 years, died yesterday at a local hospital after a long illness. She was 75.
So, what can we conclude about these 2 women? It's questionable as to whether either one of them ever experienced marital bliss. Catherine unfairly suffered consequences she did not deserve. Ethelwyn seems to have suffered naught, but made sure her philandering husband did. Actually, Melissa and I are confident that all of the life stories contained in the book, Ladies of Substance, which Melissa will be selling at the back, will entertain and inform you. I admit that we lured you here this evening by placing the titillating word scandal in the title of our presentation. I hope that my broad definition of the word has agreed with you. But I'm sure you're now persuaded that there was a complex reality to the lives of Catherine Ruddick and Ethelwyn Morris. Our subtitle also suggested that complex realities still exist in contemporary women's lives. So, look around you at the many intelligent, well-preserved, thoughtful females in this room tonight. Don't you wish you knew just a few of the stories behind our smiles? Thank you. Any questions? If you have questions,
Wait for the mic.
Yes, please.
Questions? Raise your hand if you'd like the mic.
I guess we covered everything.
I think you said it all.
No questions?
I'm afraid to talk.
I think they want to know if the bar's still open.
I just would like to say, well done. I love the tit for tat, back and forth, and thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder, when are you both going to write a book on the more recent presidents? So we can
Give me the material, and I will. Unfortunately, the papers of the last few decades don't have that Hearst quality.
Anyone else?
All right, the bar is still open.
No, I think the bar's closed, but I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. And I think there might be a few little brownie things that you can pick up on your way out, and you can also sign a book, and if anyone needs a pin. Thanks for coming.